people do get an affinity with their machine. I've got a customer that makes traditional English bows. They've named all of their machines after characters from Robin Hood.
Welcome to the MTD podcast. I'm Giovanni Albanese, hosting today's show, a passionate engineer and a proud member of the MTD team. Today we are at the home of Ecurie Bertelli, and we've got a real treat for you. Now, this company restores pre-war Aston-Martins, and we're going to find out exactly how they do this and look at the heritage and the history of the company. And I'm joined by two very special guests. Firstly, the Managing Director of Ecurie Bertelli, Robert Blakemore. Welcome to the podcast,
Thank
Robert.
you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for having MTD and opening the doors to MTD today. And secondly, the second or third time now on the MTD podcast, James Leet from Haas Automation UK. Welcome again to the podcast, James.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me again.
No, thank you. It's been an absolute fantastic day. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. I've learnt so much about this business today. But what I'd love first, Robert, is one, for our audience to learn about your business. But first, tell our audience a little bit about you and how you become the managing director of this fantastic business.
Yeah, so I grew up very fortunately with these sort of cars, very much part of family life. So my father bought one when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and he bought some more, sold them and bought them and raced them. So I grew up with at least one of these in the family garage, and I used to come here as a teenager and see the cars being restored, and then went racing and drove them around Europe with my father, and eventually graduated to racing them myself. Whilst that was going on, I went to Exeter and did a degree in economics, and then I became an airline pilot and flew for 15 years. When the opportunity arose to come and work here, then it's one of those life decisions. You think, well, if I don't come and do it, I will spend the rest of my life thinking, what would it have been like? So it was one of those decisions where I would have felt horrible for the rest of my life if I hadn't at least given it a go. So that was 7 years ago, and thoroughly enjoyed it ever since then.
Well,
so,
congratulations on an absolutely fantastic business. Can you tell our audience how far do these Aston Martins date back? I mean, pre-war, what kind of dates are we talking?
Sure. So Aston Martin was founded in 1913, but it took a little while before it made its first car. So the oldest one in existence was the third prototype. So we've actually just finished rebuilding the transmission and engine. That's actually 100 years old this year. So it was built in 1921. So obviously the First World War interrupted most of the production. So although they were designed pre-First World War, they didn't really build any. They built the two before the First World War, but the third prototype was built after the war. So from that period, the company was owned by Bamford and Martin. They eventually went bust in about 1926, and then an Italian Bertelli took over, and that's where we get our name from. And Bert Bertelli is really responsible for the majority of pre-war cars, the design and so on. And so his era stretches, or certainly of influence, from about 1926 to 1939.
Wow, I mean, what an history and heritage there. And for people that are listening to this podcast, please Google Ecurie Bertelli to look at how these cars look if you haven't already seen them. Absolutely beautiful cars. Now, James, can you tell our audience a little bit about, your business really and the relationship that you guys have got?
Yeah, sure. We were introduced to Ecurie Bertelli a few years ago now, probably 3 years ago, and there was evidentially a need for CNC equipment to come in to just really look at some of the components that were being made on conventional machines, they wanted to take things a little bit further with regard to repeatability, accuracy, for the longevity of components, because our understanding was that all of these cars, classically by their very nature, were very individual. So having to produce individual parts, it was evident that the process could be improved by the look of CNC. That was the early conversation, but then very quickly we started to build a relationship, started to look at how we could make the transition from a manual machine shop to a CNC machine shop. And that's where we are today, actually 2 years on from putting our first CNC machine in here. We've seen some evidential improvements and actually, more importantly, a way forward in the future as well to take the business into decades ahead. We're very, very conscious that we've got a big responsibility to bring our brand into such an iconic brand of Aston-Martin. And as you mentioned, Gio, these cars are beautiful. So it's really quite nice to be involved with our brand that's quite new, quite modern, very CNC. You wouldn't naturally associate it with traditional old engineering, but actually we've found a real fit and we work very well together, I think.
I certainly would definitely echo what you said, and what really strikes me from my visit, on top of the cars, is with it being such a family run business. I mean, we've sat now in the main operating office with Robert's family, your daughter Pippa and your son Archie, and the dog Chief, and also all of your employees were sat outside all having lunch together. It's such a lovely tight-knit business, and we had the pleasure to go into your manufacturing facility and met with Simon, one of your guys that is not only manufacturing parts but racing the cars, restoring the cars, and kind of literally doing everything that you could possibly imagine within the business, really, apart from accounting possibly, I don't know. But we were looking at some of the parts that are getting manufactured, and you've still got all of the original drawings that date back to 1931, or I really found that quite fascinating, really, and that you're still working to these drawings. Can you explain to our audience, what goes into restoring one of these cars, and the manufacturing of these components, and how these components are assembled, and how they kind of are put together?
Sure. So you kind of talked about a couple of processes. So restoration is one element, but manufacturing parts is a different, and sort of it sits alongside restoration. So the process of, if we were to restore a car, we obviously bring it in whatever state it is, and then it gets absolutely stripped to every last nut and bolt. Any defects are taken out, straightened, cleaned, painted, and then it's rebuilt. That's where the drawings and the parts come into that process. So because we have somewhere over 2,000 original drawings, we don't have to try and work out how the cars should be. We've got the drawings to work from, and the parts we make are dimensionally correct as they would have been made when the cars were new. And the process really is to replace as little as possible, but bring the cars up to the same standard as they would have been when they left the factory, or in some cases slightly better. What
kind of skill levels do you need to accomplish this?
Well, all of the guys in the workshop are multi-skilled, so they have to be able to run a restoration in terms of planning. They have to be able to do some basic painting. They have to be able to manufacture some components themselves. They have to be able to do wiring, woodwork, fabrication, and just planning of how it all goes together. So they're very skilled people.
So you don't ask for a lot, really, Robert. Now, James mentioned the machine tool. It's something that you've introduced into your business. What difference has this made to the manufacturing of componentry?
Well, the things that we're really looking for are a few different elements. So accuracy. If And when we get to the stage where the majority of the parts are made in CNC, then they will fit together much more easily. So we're looking for that to reduce assembly time through increased accuracy. And that's not just within a job, but over time, so that parts become more interchangeable. Speed of manufacture is the other big thing that we're after. So the first part we made, it was about 10 times quicker than doing it on a manual machine. So being able to run through batches much faster is really useful. Absolutely.
Now, James, two iconic brands. You've obviously got the Formula One team, Haas Formula One team, working with a client such as Ecurie Bertelli, and forming this relationship, partnership. One, how important is it to you as a business? But two, can you talk our audience through the process? How do you kind of select the right product for the application, and how do you grow the relationship moving forward?
Well, that last piece is critical to us. I mean, we as a business are positioned towards the SME. So I've said before on podcasts about Britain certainly being a nation of subcontractors, generally speaking. Yeah, there's some big engineering brands out there, but the majority of engineering workshops in the UK are subcontractors or SME specialists, as in this case here. So one of the things that Haas are very good at is making a machine that's fit for purpose, that is built on an economy of scale manufacture, so that we can look after that machine with common parts, almost the polar opposite of actually restoring a bespoke Aston-Martin from 1926. We're actually looking to get as many common parts as possible to make that long-term restoration, in this case process, the long-term maintenance of the machine much easier. So actually selecting the right machine is hugely important, and that's based on relationships. So all of our sales force are predominantly time-served engineers that have come through our service or applications department first. They've installed machines, they've done training on machines, they're then taught how to sell the machines. And that's really quite nice, because then they don't overpromise. They ask the right questions about getting the right machine tool for the job. In this particular case, it was about a transition from manual machining to CNC machining, and we needed a machine that was financially within reach to do that. We didn't need to go straight into 5-axis, £250,000 investments. It would make the whole project unviable. So the question process starts to be then, what components are you making? To what extent? What accuracy levels do you need? What materials? What scope? All of these questions start to come out, and we then identify the right machine. But it's not just about the machine, it's then about what support are you going to need. This is your first CNC. What levels of training, what skill levels have you already got in place? What support are you going to need after the machine's actually in place? And that's really, really important. And yes, it's absolutely worked here, but as a business model, we deal with over 2,500 customers in the UK, all of which have their own specific need. And we're quite passionate about trying to get that right in every case, which is an impossible feat, because you can't possibly get everything right in every case. But that's what we strive to do. And the reason I mention that it's an impossible case is we're always all ears. If we can improve, then please, let's do it. But we can't do that without relationships. So coming back to your point, the ability to build a relationship at not just senior level, but all levels throughout the business is crucial, because in fair winds, everything's great. It's when things need attention, you need a relationship. So that's the basis that we got together.
Some really good points there, James, and the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we spoke to Simon on the shop floor earlier, and he can't praise like the machine tool enough, and the transition kind of was quite flawless for him in regards to making components on the manual machines, which in my opinion is the best place you could possibly learn, to progressing onto the CNC and programming on the CNC. As a business, how has this transition kind of benefited you, and you know, is this the start of a new relationship that's going to move far into the future?
So the process is one really of every time we pick a new part to make, then there is investment that we have to make in terms of time, manufacturing jigs, making sure that the programs work and so on. So we are still very much in the phase of investing in terms of improving or transitioning, which is expected, and that's fine. So we're up to somewhere around 2,000 individual components, so it's clearly going to take us some time before we have transitioned. And we are very small batch manufacturing, so typically sort of 20 units at a time. It's worked well in that as we're progressing, each time we make a part, that investment is available for us when we have to remake, and we've done that a few times now. We've gone back to something we've made before, and that's really satisfying to be able to just go to the archive and very quickly and easily make a part again. So that's been really, really useful, and we expect that to be a growing benefit to the business, but we're looking forward to improving that relationship. So although we've got a mill at the moment, there are things that we will need a lathe to do. So that will be our next investment.
For me, I'm looking at this and I can really see the benefits. But we were talking earlier, Robert, and we touched upon restoration, manufacturing and racing. For people that may not be familiar with this business, it's not a case of just restoring cars that are sat in a garage and looking pretty. These cars are being taken to a racetrack and they're being pushed to their limits. Sure. And subsequently parts will need replacing. Can you kind of tell our audience the kind of costs of the cars that we're talking? Because this really kind of highlights what we're talking about in this podcast. I think it is quite, and the fact that you're racing them and pushing them to the limits, and some of the kind of applications that you're using your clients are using the cars for. Yeah.
So Aston was all about competition. So they really prioritised racing and rallying over everything else in period, and the result are cars that are very capable indeed. You have to remember, at the time these were being made, there were no race transporters or anything like that, so they were driven to and from events, and they were designed to be very reliable and very comfortable and very usable. The majority of cars that we look after on a regular basis are used in some form of competition. So predominantly there's rallying, which is either UK based, and that tends to be quite hardcore, almost off-road navigation exercises, and European, which tends to be faster, better road surfaces and more about precision timing, and then racetracks. So we race places like Le Mans, Silverstone, we go to Spa and places like that. So that's sort of more, well, it's obviously not F1 speed, but it's the same concept as F1 racing. And the Astons were very successful in period. So just after the war, they won Grand Prix. In fact, we look after the only two Astons to win a Grand Prix. This is not F1, but it's the predecessor to the F1 series. They were ran very well at Le Mans, so in 1935 came third overall, and you've got to remember that's only a 1.5 litre car with average speeds of over 75 miles an hour in 1935. So the cars were in period pushed very hard. Through improved manufacturing of parts, we can push them even harder. As an example, rev limits in period were 5,500 RPM. We can now get to 7,000 RPM. So a significant improvement. And the majority of our customers go in either race or rally and use their cars pretty hard.
And how many cars are there left in the world? You're not just selling these cars to UK customers, I presume.
No, we have a global business, so we deal with customers in as far away as Japan and Argentina, North America, all around Europe. As far as as the accuracy of numbers is concerned, we're pretty good. There is a smudge of error, but around 681 cars were built, around 450 remain. That number's slowly drifting up as cars come back into existence. We've got a note of every single chassis that was ever built, so we tend to know where they are, even if they're a bit derelict at the moment. And that is a tiny number. So at the moment it accounts for less or around half of 1% of all Aston Martins ever built. So these are super rare cars. And we pretty much know every one.
I love that, cars coming back into existence. I love that.
Presumably that's found in the back of a garage or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was only 2 weeks ago that or 3 weeks ago, I got a call from somebody who invited me to come and see a car, and it's just that. It's in the back of a shed with a bunch of other cars that are pretty much derelict. The chassis, front and rear axles are there. The bodywork is somewhat falling over, but there's enough to bring that back to life.
I was talking to James prior to the podcast, and we were talking about, I bet that every single one of these cars has got a story to tell. And we were also mentioning as well, in regards to the machine tools, your machine tools have obviously got a story to tell, James.
Well, they have, yeah. And it was interesting. I was talking to Robert earlier about the whole origin of the name VF1, very first one. And it is a little bit romantic, actually. If you're into machines, it's that very first one actually still works. It's in the showroom in California. The VF1 serial number 001 works. We did a similar thing over here. Actually, we found the first, or it was certainly one of the first 5 VFOs, as they'd then become, the VF1s that were sold into Leicester, and we managed to get that out. They were actually manufactured in plastic, believe it or not. So the guarding was all heavy duty plastic, and that still works to this day as well. So that's got its own story behind it, and many have. I've got a customer that makes bows, traditional English bows, and they've named all of their machines after characters from Robin Hood. People do get an affinity with their machine. It's nothing like the age of the heritage of these classic pre-war Aston Martins, but actually these machines do have a story, and that story often starts with exactly this, just a conversation around what kind of machine do you want, and then what do you want it to be in a few years' time. And like all good stories, if you get it off to a great start, then it's usually a story that repeats itself. So that process of a good installation and good training and good backup and service is crucial to the plot of the story.
Absolutely, and I love this story, really. I mean, it's MTD is an engineering platform. We try to be as educational as we possibly can, and I think that we mentioned, Robert, as well, about architecture and looking at the cars, dating back to the 1930s, the engineering that goes into them cars when they didn't have the technology that is available today. For me, they're like pieces of art. And how they're made or were made to them tolerances back then is just testament to British manufacturing. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And the thing that I find quite astonishing, because we spend quite a lot of time looking at the drawings, is that very skilled people sat down with nothing more than a pen, paper, slide rules, and drew every component to make a car, and it works. It's astonishing. So all we have to do is to copy what they did, but to be able to think in 3 dimensions and then draw in 2 dimensions sufficiently well to make a car is
proper engineers.
Astonishing. No CAD, nothing like that. So
everything was done on the drawing board. I've seen some of the original drawings, and it's lovely to see. Even the kind of projection of the drawings is different to how they are today. It was in inches,
yes,
not metric, and kind of the tolerances that they were working to were still quite tight, I'm guessing.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And they took great care over building them. So each engine was built, dynoed, stripped, rebuilt before going into a car.
The skill levels were so high. I mean, there's a lot of fettling that went on. I mean, that we've been quite educated today in regards to some of the processes back then. And it's quite nice in a way. I mean, now with the Formula One industry, the Formula One cars are never finished, really. You're always looking to improve them race on race. I suppose with the restoration of these cars, it's completely different because you've got a drawing and you're just replicating that part, albeit you are evolving them to a certain degree, because is it correct you kind of maybe changing materials to give them better longevity or to make them lighter?
Yeah, we do from time to time change materials. I mean, some materials they used are just not available anymore, or they have modern equivalents. We also sometimes subtly change designs to put a radius in where perhaps there should have been one but wasn't. So a few little things like that. And we also offer upgrades, so geometry changes in valve gear. We produce gearboxes to allow you to run on a distributor rather than a magneto, but we're very careful to make sure we continue to offer the original components and that any modifications are reversible. But yes, we do provide a series of upgrades to make the cars go better and more reliable.
And for people, unfortunately, we're nearly coming to the end of this podcast. I can talk about this for a lot more. But for you, Robert, for people that may have been unaware of this business and your product, what would be your biggest message to get out there, really?
Well, that Aston-Martin made cars as early as this, but also that they are super usable and a lot of fun. So we had last year a customer drove all the way from Belfast to Mantova in northern Italy. It was about 1,500 miles. He completed a 1,000-kilometre rally, drove it back here, we serviced it, and then it was off racing the following weekend. But you can go to the shops and go to the pub in the same car. So they are quick, they're reliable, they are safe, and you can have such a lot of fun in many different
and can
ways.
People come and visit you at this facility to look at the cars?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we love seeing people here and showing them around and introducing them to the cars and what we do.
Well, I've loved it today. It's been great. And question for you, really, James. There's still hundreds of engineering shops, I would guess, in the UK that are still just using manual machine tools, which is nothing wrong with that. But say, for example, they were looking to make that sort of take that leap of faith into CNC for whatever reason. What would be your advice to them, and how should they get in touch, and what kind of processes should they go through?
Well, first of all, they can visit our website, of course, haas.co.uk. I stress HAAS, Haas, rather than the HASS. That's a very different website. You can contact us there. You can have a look and have a browse around. There's loads of stories. There's loads of videos. Haas are great at giving information away. So there's an awful lot of information that you can glean from the internet. But as I mentioned before, just contact us. Our local guys, they're all engineers. They're all super friendly, down to earth, and we'll be very honest with you. If it's not something that we can do, we'll say so. Because the last thing we want to do is to recommend something that's not fit for purpose. The whole point of the business when Gene Haas set this up in the 80s was a fit for purpose machine tool that's honestly priced for the market. And that ethos carries through to this day.
One last question, James. You've obviously got these products that are perfect for making the transition from manual to CNC. But once you've actually got into CNC, what would the journey be after that?
Well, it's quite simple with Haas, actually, because the control is the same. So we've always done this right from the very word go, that the layout on a Haas control is the same today as it was 30 years ago. Obviously, the software behind it is much more advanced. However, if you've ever worked on a Haas machine of any denomination, lathe, mill, horizontal, 5-axis, whatever, old, new, the buttons are in the same place. So actually, once you've got your head around CNC and work holding and modern machining methods, modern speeds and feeds away from the conventional methodology, the transition to the next level is quite simple because the control's the same. And it's then something that you can grow into rather than grow out of. There are some pitfalls with moving from conventional to CNC. Sometimes you can get that semi-transition, so you've got a manual CNC hybrid almost, and you can get your head around it, but then you've grown out of it very quickly. And then you have to select yet another brand to take it further. The nice thing about Haas is that transition's there, and there's plenty of range to go once you've made it.
Thanks, James. And in regards to evolution and evolving even further at this business, can you see yourselves in the future investing in fifth axis machine tools, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. There are still things that we can't do, cylinder blocks, for example. So yeah, there is, as we continue the transition, scope for expanding what we do, and I think that will be a continual part of the business.
And can I ask one last favour really then, Robert? If and when that happens, can MTDCNC come back and report on this?
Absolutely. Very well.
Brilliant. Well, guys, thank you very much for your time today. It's been brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed my day's visit. There are going to be videos on the MTDCNC platform from the visit today, so please stay tuned to the MTD platforms and watch the videos on YouTube or from the MTD website. Guys, again, thank you very much. It's been absolutely fantastic. Until next week, the MTD podcast.
Thanks for listening to the MTD podcast. If you found value in this episode, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. Find more episodes on mtdcnc.com.